parking lot at Ridgeview Elementary held 46 cars on a normal Tuesday morning. I know because I counted them every day while waiting in the drop-off line. A habit born from boredom and the particular madness of being a parent who arrives 15 minutes early to everything. 46 cars, give or take 3. The crossing guard named Patty would wave her stop sign at exactly 7:42. The principal, Dr. Hendricks, stood at the front entrance with his coffee thermos and his tie that was always too short. These were facts. These were the architecture of my mornings. That Tuesday, there were 4 cars in the lot. No Patty, no Dr. Hendricks. The electronic marquee sign still scrolled its week-old message about the spring book fair. I sat in my idling Honda with my daughter Lily buckled into her booster seat behind me, and I watched the empty lot like it was a math problem I could solve if I just stared long enough. "Daddy, where is everyone?" Lily was 6. She noticed everything and feared nothing, which meant I had to do both for her. "Maybe we're early, Bug." We were not early. It was 7:44. I checked my phone. No emails from the school. No alerts from the parent app. No missed calls. I pulled up to the front entrance and the doors were locked. Not locked as in before hours locked. Locked as in chained from the inside with a bicycle lock threaded through the handles. Through the glass, I could see the hallway lights were on. The floor was clean, but there was no one. Not a teacher, not a janitor, not a single child. I should have driven home. I understand that now with the clarity that only aftermath provides. But I didn't drive home. I drove to the Walmart on Route 9 because I needed coffee filters and because normal people do normal things when the world presents them with information they are not ready to metabolize. The Walmart parking lot held 300 cars on a Tuesday morning. I know because I'd been shopping there for 11 years and the lot was always a negotiation. That morning, it held maybe 20, clustered near the entrance like a herd that had drawn together for warmth. Inside, half the self-checkout lanes were unmanned. The pharmacy window was shuttered with a handwritten sign that said, "Closed until further notice," in black marker. I bought coffee filters. I bought Lily a juice box. I bought a bag of animal crackers. I stood in the self-checkout lane and scanned my items while my daughter ate a cracker shaped like a giraffe, and I noticed that the music, the terrible, endless Walmart soundtrack, was not playing. The store was silent in a way that commercial spaces are not designed to be. I could hear the refrigeration units humming in the dairy section 60 feet away. I could hear my own breathing. The woman at the one open register was watching me. She was maybe 50, heavy-set, with reading glasses on a beaded chain. Her name tag said Doreen. She wasn't scanning anything. She wasn't helping anyone. She was watching me like I was the last channel on a television, and she was deciding whether to turn it off. "You should go home," she said. Not unkindly, not with urgency, with the flat finality of someone who had already said it 30 times that morning and no longer expected it to work. "What's happening?" I asked. Doreen looked at Lily, looked back at me. Something moved behind her eyes that I would later identify as the specific grief of knowing something terrible and being unable to make strangers care quickly enough. "Go home. Stay inside. Don't answer the door for anyone you don't recognize." "Is there—" "They closed Mercy South last night. The one on Bannister. They're not saying why." She paused. "But the parking lot there is full. Every lot in the city is either empty or full. Nothing in between. You understand what I'm saying?" I didn't. Not yet. But Lily had finished her juice box and was asking about school, and Doreen had already turned away. I drove home on streets that felt like a Sunday, but moved like a weekday. Traffic lights cycled through their colors for intersections, with no cars waiting. A city bus passed me heading south, completely empty except for the driver, who stared ahead with both hands on the wheel like he was navigating through fog only he could see. I turned on the radio. The AM station I used for traffic was broadcasting dead air. I scanned through the dial and found a woman on 91.7 reading a prepared statement about hospital capacity and voluntary home isolation. Her voice was controlled in the way that broadcast voices become when the auto cue has been replaced by something handwritten. She used the phrase, "out of an abundance of caution," 3 times in 2 minutes. She did not use the word outbreak. She did not use any word that would have given me permission to panic. At home, I unbuckled Lily and carried her inside. Our house was a 3-bedroom ranch in a subdivision called Meadow Creek that contained no meadow and no creek. My wife Sarah was supposed to be at work. She was a dental hygienist at a practice on the east side. I called her cell. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. I called the practice. A recording told me they were closed for the day and to call back during normal business hours. I texted Sarah. "School was closed. Weird morning. Call me when you can." I made Lily breakfast even though she'd already eaten. I needed to use my hands. I needed the ritual of bread in toaster, butter on bread, plate on table. She sat at the kitchen counter and colored while I stood at the window and watched our street. The Munoz family across the road had both cars in the driveway. The Petersons next door had their blinds drawn, which was unusual for Carla Peterson, who opened every window in her house by 7 regardless of weather. By 10 o'clock, Sarah hadn't called back. I'd sent 4 texts. I called her mother in Topeka, who answered on the first ring and said Sarah had called her at 6 that morning, asking if she'd seen the news. "What news?" I asked. Joyce didn't know. Sarah hadn't explained. She'd just said she loved her and that she'd call again soon. The way Joyce repeated this to me, I could hear her trying to give the words a weight they didn't naturally carry, pressing them into a shape that meant something other than what it was starting to mean. I turned on the television. Local news was running a scroll along the bottom about road closures on the south side. The anchor was talking about a water main break. Behind him, through the studio window that showed the downtown skyline, I could see 3 helicopters in a pattern that was not news coverage and not traffic monitoring. They moved in a grid. They moved like they were looking for something. Lily tugged my sleeve. "Daddy, Mr. Boots is acting weird." Mr. Boots was our cat. 14 years old, gray, arthritic, and committed to sleeping 20 hours a day. He was standing at the back sliding door with his back arched and his tail inflated to twice its normal size, staring into our backyard at something beyond the fence. I walked to the door and looked. Our yard backed up to a drainage easement, a strip of gravel and concrete that ran behind 6 houses before emptying into a retention pond. Standing in that easement, maybe 40 feet from my fence, was a woman in hospital scrubs. Blue top, blue pants, white shoes. She was barefoot, actually. I thought the shoes were white, but she simply had no shoes and her feet were pale. She stood perfectly still with her arms at her sides and her head tilted at an angle that no comfortable person tilts their head. I watched her for 30 seconds. She did not move. She did not blink. She did not appear to be breathing. Then Lily was beside me, and I picked her up and stepped back from the glass and pulled the blinds. "Who was that lady, Daddy?" "Nobody, Bug. Just a neighbor." That was my first lie to my daughter about what was happening. It would not be my last, but it was the only one I told while still believing I might be right. By noon, I had locked every door, closed every blind, and moved Lily's coloring station to the interior hallway where there were no windows. I told her we were playing a game called Camping Inside. She accepted this with the terrifying adaptability of children, arranging her crayons on the carpet and asking if we could have s'mores later. I said yes. I said yes to everything she asked that day, because each yes was a brick in the wall I was building between her and the truth I was assembling from fragments. Sarah had not called, had not texted. Her phone now went directly to voicemail without ringing, which meant it was either dead or off. I called her practice again. No answer. I called 3 of her coworkers whose numbers I had. 2 went to voicemail. The third, a woman named Keisha, answered in a whisper and said, "We're not there. Don't go there. I can't talk." Then the line went dead. I stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand and felt the specific vertigo of a world rearranging itself while refusing to announce the new configuration. Something was wrong at a scale I could not yet determine from inside my house. The radio woman had said voluntary home isolation. Doreen had said, "Stay inside." Keisha had said, "Don't go there." Every piece of information I received was a command without context, a directive without explanation, and every one of them conflicted with the single imperative my body was now screaming: find Sarah. At 1:15 p.m., my neighbor Frank Munoz knocked on my front door. I looked through the peephole. Frank was 58, retired electrician, built like a refrigerator, and scared of absolutely nothing I had witnessed in 11 years of living across from him. He was standing on my porch with a shotgun in one hand and his car keys in the other, and his face was doing something I had never seen Frank's face do. He was pale, not sick pale, afraid pale. I opened the door. "Marcus, you need to get in your car right now. You and Lily. Follow me north on Route 9. "Frank, what?" "They're coming from the hospital district, Mercy South, Truman Med, Research, all of them. They discharged everyone last night, or the people just left. I don't know. But they're walking. My brother-in-law is a paramedic and he called me at 5 this morning and said, 'Get out.' And I didn't listen, and now I'm listening." "Who's they?" Frank's jaw worked. He looked over my shoulder into my house, looked back at me. "Sick people. Except they're not sick like you think of sick. They don't." He stopped, recalibrated. "Do you know where Sarah is?" "No." Something in his expression broke. Not for me, for the situation, for the mathematics of what I had just said. "Marcus, you need to choose right now. You have maybe 2 hours before the street is not drivable. I've seen them. They move in groups, and they don't stop, and they don't respond, and anyone they touch." He stopped again. "Bring Lily. Follow me. We'll go to my cousin's in Cameron. You can call Sarah from there. I'm not leaving without her." "Then you're killing your daughter." I have never been struck by another man, but those words hit me with more force than a fist ever could, because they arrived carrying the weight of a truth I was not ready to hold. Frank wasn't being cruel. Frank was being precise. And the precision was what made me step back from the door, like he'd shoved me. 2 hours, he said. I'm leaving at 3. If you're behind me, good. If you're not. He didn't finish. He walked back across the street to where his wife Maria was loading their Suburban with coolers and blankets. I closed the door. I leaned against it. From the hallway, Lily called, "Daddy, I need the green crayon. The other green. The one that's more like a tree." I spent the next 40 minutes trying to reach Sarah. I called hospitals. I called police non-emergency lines that rang endlessly. I called her friend Dana, who lived near the practice, and got a busy signal that cycled into static. I opened my laptop and searched for news, and found local outlets running stories from the day before and national outlets running nothing. Social media was a wall of confusion. People asking if anyone else's neighborhood was quiet, people posting photos of empty highways, people marking themselves safe from something no one had named. Then I found the video. Someone had uploaded it to a neighborhood group 40 minutes prior. Shaky phone footage from what appeared to be an overpass on 71 Highway looking south. Below, the road was gridlocked, but not with traffic. People were walking north in the southbound lanes. Hundreds of them. They moved at a uniform pace that was not quite walking speed and not quite anything else. They did not jostle. They did not speak to each other. They did not look up. They moved like water finding its level, filling the available space with a patience that was more terrifying than any urgency could have been. The person filming was breathing hard and whispering, "Oh my God," on a loop, and then the video ended. I watched it 3 times. On the third viewing, I noticed that several of the walking figures were in hospital gowns. Several others were in normal clothes, but barefoot. One, near the center of the frame, was wearing dental scrubs. I could not zoom in far enough to see faces. I will never know if one of them was Sarah. But the color of those scrubs, teal green with a floral print, was the same set Sarah had bought last month because her old ones were getting threadbare. I stared at that cluster of pixels until my vision blurred, and then I closed the laptop and sat in my kitchen and made a decision that I will carry for the rest of my life. I chose Lily. I say that plainly because dressing it in justification would dishonor both the choice and the woman I may have abandoned by making it. I did not know Sarah was in that crowd. I did not know she wasn't. I knew my daughter was alive and present and asking me about green crayons. And I knew that Frank was leaving at 3. And I knew that 2 hours from now this street might hold things I could not protect her from alone. I packed a bag. Diapers? No, Lily was past diapers. Clothes, her blanket, her stuffed rabbit named Dr. Carrots, snacks, water bottles, the first aid kit from under the bathroom sink, my phone charger, the cash from the envelope in our filing cabinet, $340. I wrote Sarah a note and left it on the kitchen counter. Went north with Frank and Maria. Cameron, M.O. Frank's cousin Miguel's house. I love you. Please come. Please be okay. At 2:47 p.m., I buckled Lily into her booster seat. She was holding Dr. Carrots and asking if we were going on an adventure. I said yes. I told her we were going to visit some friends, and it would be fun, and there might be a dog there. She lit up at the word dog. I used her joy as fuel to walk around to the driver's side and start the engine and not look back at my house where my wife's coffee mug was still in the sink from yesterday morning. Frank pulled out of his driveway at exactly 3. I followed his Suburban north on Elm. Behind us, in my rearview mirror, I could see the Petersons' house with its blinds still drawn. They had not come outside. No one had knocked on their door to tell them. I almost stopped. I almost went back. I didn't. That's the second thing I carry. Route 9 northbound should have been a 40-minute drive to the Cameron exit under normal conditions. Within the first 2 miles, I understood that normal conditions had ended sometime during the night while I slept in my bed beside my wife's empty side. She'd worked late, I'd assumed, had fallen asleep before she came home, and the world had reorganized itself into a new grammar I was only now beginning to parse. Traffic was light, but moving in one direction. Everyone was heading north. The southbound lanes were empty in a way that felt intentional, as if whatever was behind us had issued a current that pushed all objects in one direction. I stayed 2 car lengths behind Frank's Suburban and watched his brake lights like they were the only reliable signal left in my life. Maria sat in their passenger seat. Their adult son, David, was in the back with their dog, a boxer named Celia, who kept pressing her nose against the window. Lily sang to herself in the back seat. Wheels on the bus, then Twinkle Twinkle, then a song she'd made up about a fish who lived in a hat. Her voice was the only thing keeping my hand steady on the wheel. Every few minutes, I checked my phone mounted on the dash. No message from Sarah. No signal bars flickering with hope. At mile 6, the first roadblock appeared. Not police, civilian. 3 pickup trucks parked across the right lane, narrowing traffic to a single file. Men stood beside them, holding rifles with the casual comfort of people who'd owned firearms their entire lives. They weren't threatening anyone. They were watching. One of them waved Frank through, then looked into my car, saw Lily, and waved me through too. As I passed, I heard one of them say into a handheld radio, "2 more northbound. Family unit, clean. Clean." The word stayed with me. It implied the existence of its opposite. It implied someone somewhere had established criteria. It implied that at some point ahead or behind, someone might not be waved through. At mile 11, we hit stop traffic. Frank pulled onto the shoulder, and I followed. He got out and walked back to my window, and I rolled it down. Accident ahead, maybe a mile up. David's checking his phone for alternate routes. "Frank, have you heard anything about what this actually is?" He leaned on my door. His shotgun was behind his seat now, but I could see the stock through his rear window. He smelled like coffee and motor oil, and his hands were not shaking. And I envied him for both of those things. My brother-in-law said the hospitals hit capacity 3 days ago. Whatever they were admitting people for, it wasn't resolving. People weren't dying, but they weren't getting better. Then last night, something changed. They started getting up, walking out, not checking out, walking out. Staff couldn't stop them, didn't want to stop them, from what Ricky said. Because they weren't violent, they were just leaving, all at once, like a signal went off. And they're dangerous. Frank looked at Lily through the window. She was feeding Dr. Carrots an imaginary meal. Ricky said, "Don't let them touch you." That's all he said. Don't let them touch you, and don't stay in any place they're walking toward. I thought about the woman in the drainage easement behind my house, 40 feet from my fence, standing, waiting, head tilted. I thought about how Mr. Boots had known before I did. Did Ricky say what happens if they touch you? He said you go with them. That's the word he used. Go. Like it's a choice you make except you don't make it. Traffic began to move. Frank jogged back to his Suburban and we pulled forward. I tried the radio again, and this time found a man on an AM frequency who sounded like he was broadcasting from a garage. He was listing road conditions in a clipped, efficient monotone. Route 9 cleared a mile marker 22. Interstate 35 jammed solid from the 210 junction northward. Highway 69 compromised south of Harrisonville. He used that word, compromised, and did not explain it. He listed shelters: the National Guard Armory in Plattsburgh, the fairgrounds in Gallatin, a church in Hamilton, accepting families. Families. Again, the word carried taxonomic weight. There were categories now: family units, clean travelers, compromised roads. The vocabulary of the day was building itself in real time, and I was learning it the way a child learns, by immersion, by context, without a dictionary. We cleared the accident, a sedan that had drifted into the median, doors open, no occupants visible, and drove another 18 miles at a steady 50. The landscape was flat Missouri farmland, early spring green, unremarkable and beautiful in the way that only threatened things become beautiful. Every farmhouse we passed looked occupied. Everyone had lights on despite it being mid-afternoon. Several had vehicles parked across their driveways as barricades. One had a hand-painted sign on plywood that read, "No entry, armed. God bless." Lily fell asleep at mile 22. Her head lolled against Dr. Carrot's, and her mouth opened slightly, and she breathed with a total commitment that only sleeping children achieve. I adjusted my rearview mirror to watch her instead of the road behind me. It was selfish. It was necessary. At mile 29, Frank's brake lights flared, and he pulled off at a gas station, one of those single pump operations attached to a bait shop on a county road. I pulled in behind him. David got out stretching, letting Celia out on the leash. Maria stayed in the passenger seat with her rosary. Frank walked back to me. "Need gas?" I checked. 3/4 full. "I'm okay." "Water and bathroom, then. Might not be another stop for a while." He glanced inside the bait shop. A man sat behind the counter watching us through the window. He didn't wave, didn't turn us away either. "I'll go talk to him." I carried Lily inside. She woke enough to use the bathroom with my help. A filthy single stall that I'd normally never let her near. And then fell back against my shoulder, sleep-heavy and warm. The bait shop man was named Carl. He had a transistor radio on his counter tuned to the same AM frequency I'd found in the car. He and Frank were talking in low voices. I caught fragments. National Guard. South of the river. Not responding to anything. Just touch, and that's it. Carl noticed me listening. "You the father?" "Yes." "How old?" "She's 6. He nodded, reached under his counter and produced a package of peanut butter crackers. "For her, when she wakes up." He set them on the counter without ceremony. "Cameron's another 40 minutes if the road stays clear. But I'd go through Kingston instead of taking 69. A fella came through an hour ago, said there's a cluster on 69, just past the dam." "A cluster of what?" Carl looked at me. He had small blue eyes behind thick glasses and a face that had weathered 60-some years of rural Missouri without complaint. "Of them. Of the people who aren't people anymore. Or who are people but aren't." He waved his hand. "I don't have the word. Nobody has the word yet. They just stand there in the road, and you can't get through because if you get out to move them, they touch you. And then you stand there too." I thought about that. A human roadblock that grew by one with every person who tried to clear it. An obstruction that recruited its own traffic. The efficiency of it was what disturbed me. Not violence, not speed, patience. "Thank you," I said. I put a 20 on his counter for the crackers he'd given freely and carried my daughter back to the car. Frank was already back in his Suburban. He'd heard about Kingston too. He flashed his headlights twice, our agreed signal for ready to move, and pulled back onto the road. I buckled Lily in. She murmured something about Dr. Carrot's needing a bath. I tucked her blanket around her legs and checked my phone one more time. Nothing from Sarah. The signal was down to 1 bar now, flickering. I typed a text anyway. "We're on Route 9 North. Please answer. I love you." It sat in the outbox, unsent, for the next 3 hours. The Kingston Bypass was a 2-lane county road that wound through timber and pasture with no center line and no shoulders. Frank's Suburban kicked up gravel on the curves, and I followed his dust cloud like a pilgrim following a column of smoke. The sun was angling westward now, maybe 4 o'clock, and the shadows of trees stretched across the road in bars that made me grip the wheel tighter each time we passed through one. We were 6 miles from Cameron when I saw the first one up close. A man stood in a field to our right, maybe 30 yards from the road. He wore khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt, office clothes, no jacket, no shoes. He stood in the turned soil of a freshly planted field facing the road. Not walking, not moving, just facing us. As we drove past, his head turned to track our movement with a smoothness that was mechanical in its precision. No body movement, just the head, following, measuring. I did not slow down. Frank did not slow down. We drove past, and I watched him in my mirror, still turning, still tracking, until we crested a small hill and he disappeared. Then there was another. A woman in a driveway, standing beside a mailbox. Same stillness, same tracking motion as we passed. Then two more in the parking lot of a closed feed store, standing 6 feet apart at identical angles, facing the road. Their heads moved together as we passed, synchronized in a way that made my stomach drop because synchronization implies coordination. And coordination implies communication, and communication implies something I was not prepared to name. Daddy? Lily was awake. Why are those people standing like that? They're waiting for a ride, Bug. They look funny. Don't look at them, okay? Look at Dr. Carrots. Tell me about his day. She launched into an elaborate narrative about Dr. Carrots visiting the moon, and I let her voice fill the car while I counted the standing figures along the road. 7 in the next mile, then 12. They were not blocking the road. They were not approaching. They were witnessing. And with each one we passed, I felt something I can only describe as a tension. Not hostile, not welcoming, but absolute. Being fully perceived by something that has no reason to perceive you is its own category of terror. Frank accelerated. I matched him. We hit 70 on a road meant for 45, and the figures became blurs in my peripheral vision, but their presence accumulated like pressure against the windows. Lily kept talking about Dr. Carrots and the moon, and I said, wow. And then what happened at intervals and gripped the wheel until my knuckles ached. At the Cameron city limit sign, the figures stopped. The road was clear. The town looked normal. Lights on, a few cars moving through intersections, the McDonald's drive-through line holding 3 vehicles. Frank slowed to the speed limit, and I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't known was clenched. His cousin Miguel's house was a white ranch with a chain-link fence on a street called Maple Drive. Miguel was on the porch when we pulled in. He was younger than Frank, wiry, with a military posture that came from actual military service. He helped Maria out of the Suburban and hugged her, and then shook Frank's hand in the way that men shake hands when they want to embrace, but won't. I parked on the street. I got out. My legs were shaking. Miguel looked at me. "This is Marcus," Frank said. "And his daughter, his wife." "Couldn't reach her," I said. The words came out flat and simple, and I was grateful for that because anything more would have broken me in front of my child. Miguel nodded once. "Come inside. We have room." Miguel's house was organized for efficiency in a way that civilian homes rarely achieve. He'd moved all furniture against walls to clear central pathways. The kitchen table held a battery-powered radio, a county map with roads marked in red and green, 2 handguns, and a spiral notebook filled with timestamps and shorthand. He'd been tracking the situation since 3 in the morning. His girlfriend, Teresa, was filling water containers at the kitchen sink with a focused rhythm that suggested she'd been doing it for hours. Lily was immediately drawn to Miguel's living room, where a large dog, a shepherd mix named Ace, lay on a blanket watching the front door. Ace lifted his head when Lily approached, sniffed her offered hand, and allowed her to sit beside him. Within minutes, she was telling him about Dr. Carrots. I stood in the kitchen with Frank and Miguel and listened. Guards set up a perimeter around Kansas City Metro at about 2 a.m., Miguel said, pointing to red lines on his map. They're not trying to contain the people. They're trying to slow them. Difference is important. Containment would mean they think they can stop it. Slowing means they're buying time for evacuation corridors. Evacuation to where? Frank asked. North. Maryville, St. Joseph, into Iowa. The clusters are concentrated around hospitals right now, but they're spreading radially. My buddy at Whiteman said they're tracking movement patterns from the air. The groups move toward population. Miguel looked at me. Your wife, where was she last? Her dental practice, East Side, near Truman Med. Miguel found Truman Medical on the map. It sat inside the innermost red circle. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Is there communication? I asked. Anyone inside the perimeter still reporting? Cell towers are saturated or down. Landlines in some areas. The AM stations are running off generators. The guy on 810 has been broadcasting non-stop since midnight. Miguel turned up his radio. The same clipped voice I'd heard in the car was listing updated road conditions. More roads red now, fewer green. Teresa brought coffee. I held the mug and let the heat be a sensation I could focus on while my mind tried to process the geometry of what Miguel's map was telling me. Sarah's practice was 10 miles from the nearest red line. The practice was on a road that led directly to 2 hospitals. If the walking figures were moving outward from medical centers, her building was in the path. Has anyone gone in and come back out? I asked. Miguel paused. You mean into the clusters? Into the zone, past the guard perimeter. Has anyone gone in and extracted someone? Frank put his hand on my shoulder. Marcus, I'm asking a question. Has it been done? Miguel considered me with the evaluation of someone who has commanded men in bad decisions. 2 that I know of. A guy from Liberty went in for his mother this morning around 7. Got her. Got back. She's at the armory now. But that was early, before the density increased. And the other? Didn't come back. The room settled into the weight of that sentence. Teresa turned off the tap. The only sound was the radio voice and Lily talking to Ace about the hierarchy of animals on the moon. I looked at the map. I looked at the distance. I looked at my daughter sitting on the floor with a dog and a stuffed rabbit. Alive because I had chosen her over everything else. Then I looked at the phone in my hand. Signal restored here, 2 bars. And the outbox message to Sarah still marked unsent. The message sent. The tiny whoosh sound of departure. I watched the screen. Delivered. Then read. The word read appeared beneath my message at 5:02 p.m. She was alive. She had her phone. She could see my words. No reply came. I stared at that read receipt for 20 minutes. It was simultaneously the best and worst piece of information I had received all day. She was alive enough to read a text. She was unable or unwilling to respond. The gap between those 2 facts contained every possible horror and every possible hope, and I could not collapse it into either without more data. Miguel offered me a plate of food. I ate without tasting. Lily had fallen asleep again on the floor beside Ace, who had positioned himself between her and the front door with the deliberate intentionality of a working animal who has identified his assignment. Teresa covered her with a throw blanket and moved Dr. Carrots under her arm, and I watched this small mercy performed by a stranger and felt something crack along a fault line I hadn't known was under pressure. I went outside. The evening was cool, and the street was quiet in a way that might have been normal for Cameron, Missouri on a Tuesday night. Lights in windows, the distant sound of a television through someone's open window. a cat crossing the road 3 houses down. But under the normalcy was a tension I could feel in my teeth, an awareness shared by every house on this block that normalcy was now a performance being held together by collective will. Frank came out and stood beside me on the porch. She read my message. "Good. That's good." She didn't reply. Frank said nothing for a while. Then, "Could be a lot of reasons." "Could be? You're thinking about going back." I didn't answer because the answer was obvious, and saying it aloud would make it something I had to justify or defend. And I didn't want to do either of those things. I wanted to hold the idea the way you hold a grenade, with the pin still in, aware of its potential, committed to nothing. "If you go," Frank said carefully, "what happens to Lily?" "I'd leave her here, with you and Maria, for 1 night, maybe 2. And if you don't come back?" The question hung between us. Behind it were all the practical considerations: legal guardianship, Sarah's mother in Topeka, my brother in Denver, whom I hadn't spoken to in 8 months. Behind those were the emotional ones. Lily waking up in a stranger's house asking for Daddy and Daddy not being there, and no one being able to explain why in a way that a 6-year-old could carry. "Frank," she read my message. "She's there. She's alive. And she can't get out alone. You don't know that. She might be. If she could leave, she would have replied. She would have said, 'I'm coming,' or 'I'm safe,' or even just 'okay.' She read it, and she couldn't answer. That means she's stuck. Or she's..." I stopped. I would not say the other possibility. Not yet. Frank sat on the porch step. In the dusk light, he looked older than 58. He looked like every man who has ever watched another man make a decision. He cannot endorse, but understands completely. "Give it until morning," he said. "If she hasn't replied by sunrise and you still want to go, I'll watch Lily. But you take my shotgun and you take Miguel's radio and you come back. No matter what you find, you come back." "I will." "Swear to me, on that little girl in there." "I swear." He stood and gripped my arm, not a handshake, something older and harder, and went inside. I stayed on the porch and watched the road south and willed my phone to light up with her name. The stars came out. They looked the same as always. I don't know why I expected them to look different, but I did. And their indifference was its own kind of answer. At 4:17 a.m. I was still awake on Miguel's couch when my phone buzzed. I grabbed it with both hands. The text was from Sarah. 3 words. "Don't come, run." I sat up. My heartbeat was audible in the quiet house. I typed back immediately. "Where are you? Are you safe? I'm in Cameron." The reply came in 11 seconds. "Not safe. Changed. Still me, but not for long. Take Lily north. Don't look for me. I love you both. Please." I typed, "Sarah, tell me where you are. I can come get you." 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. Then, I can feel it working. The thinking part is still here, but the moving part isn't mine anymore. I walked here from the practice. I don't know why. I'm in a field somewhere near the highway. There are others. We're all standing. I used my last. The message cut off. No more appeared. I sat in the dark with my phone glowing against my face and read those messages 4 times, and then I read them a 5th time to make sure they were real and not the product of exhaustion or terror or hope inverted into hallucination. They were real. Each word was in her voice, in her rhythm, in the specific diction that was Sarah. The way she wrote "please" at the end of requests. The way she used dashes instead of periods when thinking faster than she could type. She was alive. She was conscious. She was inside one of those standing figures I had driven past, and she had watched me go. And she had been unable to wave or call out because her body was no longer taking instructions from the part of her that was still her. The horror of that. The specific, personalized, intimate horror of being awake inside a body that has been requisitioned was so enormous that I could not process it as emotion. It arrived as information, clean, terrible, total. I did not go back. I want you to understand that not because I need absolution, but because the decision matters. She told me not to come. She told me to run. She used her last moment of autonomy, whatever battery life, whatever coordination her fingers still had, to issue a directive. And I honored it. Not because I'm brave, not because I'm rational, because she was still making choices, and I owed her the respect of obeying her last one. I woke Frank at 5. I showed him the messages. He read them without expression, and then set the phone face down on the counter and put his hand on the back of my neck and squeezed once. That was all. That was enough. At 6, Lily woke up. She climbed onto the couch and put her head in my lap and said, "Is Mommy coming?" "Not today, Bug, but she loves you. She told me to tell you she loves you so much." "Okay. Can I have cereal?" I made her cereal. I poured milk. I sat across from her and watched her eat, and I rebuilt myself around the fact of her existence. The sound of her chewing, the careful way she picked out the marshmallows first, the milk dribbling down her chin. I rebuilt myself around the only assignment left. I was not a husband who could save his wife. I was a father who could save his daughter. The transition between those two identities took less than a second and lasted the rest of my life. We stayed in Cameron for 6 days. During those 6 days, the world completed its rearrangement. The AM radio stations consolidated into 3 voices broadcasting on rotation. A woman named Adler, who seemed to be military, a man named Cho, who ran logistics, and a volunteer named Beck, who read names. The names were not death lists. They were sighting lists. People spotted standing in the clusters, identified by clothing or location or distinguishing features, reported by people who knew them. It was a census of the lost. I listened every night for Sarah's name. It never came. I was grateful. Hearing it would have made her a data point, and she was not a data point. She was my wife who had told me to run. The National Guard perimeter held for 4 days, and then it didn't. Not because it was breached violently, the clusters never attacked. It failed because guardsmen touched the standing figures while trying to move them. And those guardsmen joined the clusters, and new gaps opened in the perimeter. And the remaining soldiers chose retreat over attrition. The radius expanded. Towns that had been safe became contested. Routes that had been green on Miguel's map turned yellow and then red. On day 5, Miguel convened a meeting in his living room. Present: Miguel, Teresa, Frank, Maria, David, myself, and 2 neighbors, a retired couple named Hal and Donna, who had nowhere else to go. Lily was in the backyard with Ace and Celia, visible through the kitchen window, building something from sticks. "Cameron's not viable past this week," Miguel said. He pointed to the map, which now had more red than green. "The nearest confirmed safe zone is the Armory in Maryville, 60 miles north. The Guard is consolidating there. After that, it's Iowa. The state is setting up processing centers in Lamoni and Osceola." "Processing?" Maria asked. "Quarantine observation. 24 hours, no contact events. You're cleared. They're taking family units first." Miguel looked at me. "You and Lily would be priority." "What about all of us?" Frank asked. We go together. 2 vehicles. We leave tomorrow at dawn. The road through Bethany is still green as of this morning's broadcast. After that, we improvise. Donna, the retired neighbor, raised her hand like she was in a classroom. What happens if we stay? Miguel considered this. The clusters are moving north at roughly 8 miles per day. They'll reach Cameron's outskirts in 4 days, maybe 3. When they arrive, they don't attack. They stand. They fill the streets, and anyone who tries to move through them touches one, and then they stand too. Eventually, the whole town is standing. That's what happened to Butler. That's what happened to Peculiar. The names of dead towns fell into the room like stones into water. Butler, Peculiar, places I had driven through, places with gas stations and schools and people whose lives were as ordinary as mine had been 48 hours ago. We leave tomorrow, Frank said. Not a question. We packed that night. Miguel organized the vehicles with military efficiency, his truck leading with the heavier supplies and weapons, Frank's Suburban following with passengers and essential bags. I consolidated everything Lily and I owned into one duffel and her backpack. I kept the phone fully charged. I checked it every hour. No new messages from Sarah. The conversation sat in my messages app like an artifact under glass. Time-stamped, immutable, sacred. We left Cameron at 5:48 a.m. on a Wednesday. 8 adults, 1 child, 2 dogs. The morning was fog-heavy and silent in the way that early mornings in rural Missouri are silent. Insect hum, dew drip, no human sound. Lily was in the middle row of the Suburban between Maria and me, with Dr. Carrots and a coloring book and the gravity of a child who has adapted to upheavals so completely that it has become her normal. The first 20 miles were uneventful. Farmland, fence posts, a herd of cattle grazing as if the word outbreak had never been spoken within their hearing. Then, past a crossroads marked by a grain elevator, we encountered our first cluster on the road itself. They stood across both lanes, 9 of them, men and women in various states of dress, one in a bathrobe, one in a suit, one in what appeared to be running clothes, as if she'd been mid-jog when the thing found her. They faced south, which meant they faced us, and as our vehicles approached, their heads tilted in that synchronized tracking motion that I now recognized as the signature gesture of whatever inhabited them. Miguel stopped. Frank stopped behind him. No one moved for a full minute. Then Miguel's voice crackled over the handheld radio Frank held. "Shoulder, both sides. Wide berth. Don't stop." We pulled onto the gravel shoulder, giving the cluster a berth of maybe 15 feet. As we crept past, I pressed Lily against my side and covered her eyes with my hand. "Camping game, Bug. Keep your eyes closed until I say." Through my window, I could see them. Close now, close enough to see their faces. They looked normal. That was the worst part. No blood, no disfigurement, no visible sign of what had happened to them. They looked like 9 people waiting for a bus that would never come. Except their eyes tracked us with that mechanical precision, and one of them, the woman in running clothes, opened her mouth as we passed and said something I couldn't hear through the glass, but could read on her lips. "Stay." Just that. Stay. A single word that was invitation and command and hunger all compressed into one syllable. I turned away and held Lily tighter, and we cleared them and accelerated back onto the road. And I did not look in the mirror. David's voice came over the radio from the back seat of our vehicle. "Dad." One of them stepped forward when we passed. Just one step. Frank keyed the radio. "Miguel, copy that?" "Copy. Moving faster now." We hit 65 on a road meant for 50. The fog was lifting, but visibility still felt compromised. Not by weather, but by the knowledge that any clear stretch might end in another cluster, another choice between shoulder and stop. We passed 3 more groups in the next 10 miles, each one larger than the last. 12, then 20, then a mass of perhaps 40 that required us to leave the road entirely and drive through a mown hayfield to circumvent them. The Suburban bounced over furrows, and Lily laughed, because to her it was a ride, an adventure, a thing Daddy was doing to make the drive fun. We reached Bethany by mid-morning. The town was not abandoned, but it was evacuating. Vehicles lined the main street in a northbound queue that moved at walking speed. A sheriff's deputy stood at the central intersection directing traffic with the controlled exhaustion of someone who has been on shift for 18 hours. He waved us into the queue without question. We idled past storefronts with taped windows and a hardware store with its doors open and shelves half empty. People were loading trucks with water, canned goods, fuel containers. It looked orderly. It looked practiced. It looked like a town that had watched other towns disappear and had decided to leave before the standing figures arrived. In the queue, we sat for 40 minutes. Lily needed to use the bathroom. Maria took her into a gas station while I held our place in line. Frank got out to stretch and talk to the car behind us. A family of 4 in a minivan, the mother driving, 3 children in the back, the father absent in a way that no one asked about because everyone's story contained an absence now. I checked my phone. Signal was weak but present. I opened Sarah's messages, read them again, the timestamps, the spacing, the way her last message cut off mid-thought. I imagined her fingers slowing, the phone slipping, the screen going dark in her hand as she joined the stillness around her. I imagined her face tilting toward the highway as cars passed. I imagined her saying, "Stay." I closed the phone. I could not carry that image and function. I could carry the messages. I could not carry the extrapolation. Maria returned with Lily, who was eating a granola bar someone in the gas station had given her. The line moved. We cleared Bethany and hit open road again. Highway 136 westbound toward Interstate 35. Miguel's plan was to intersect the highway and take it straight north to Iowa. The radio said I-35 was flowing above the Missouri border. Below it was unpredictable. At the E35 interchange, we found what unpredictable meant. The southbound lanes were completely still, not with traffic, but with people. Standing figures filled the highway from median to shoulder for as far as I could see in either direction. Hundreds, perhaps 1,000. They stood between abandoned vehicles like passengers who had exited their cars and forgotten why. And they all faced north, toward us. The northbound lanes, separated by a concrete median, were clear. Miguel merged without hesitation, and we accelerated north with that wall of silent figures to our left, separated by 4 feet of concrete barrier and the hope that 4 feet was enough. Lily looked out the window. "Daddy, why are all those people standing in the road?" "They're part of a thing, Bug. A big thing that's happening. But they can't get to us." "Are they sick?" "Sort of. Like Mommy." The question hit me with a force that buckled something in my chest. I had not told her about Sarah's messages. I had not told her anything beyond, "Mommy can't come right now." But children construct understanding from fragments, and she had assembled enough fragments to build a truth I hadn't given her permission to hold. "Like Mommy," I said. "Yes." She nodded, tucked Dr. Carrots under her chin. "I hope she gets better." "Me too, Bug." We drove north with 1,000 standing figures watching us go. None of them moved. None of them stepped toward the barrier. They simply watched, and I watched back. And somewhere in that mass of still faces, my wife might have stood with my last words read on a phone, clutched in a hand she could no longer open. The Iowa border announced itself with a sign and a checkpoint. National Guard vehicles blocked 2 of 3 lanes, funneling traffic into a single passage monitored by soldiers in full gear with face shields down. The line was long, perhaps 50 vehicles, but it moved. At the checkpoint, a soldier with a clipboard approached each vehicle. She asked how many occupants. She asked our origin. She asked if any of us had made physical contact with an affected individual in the past 48 hours. She said, "affected individual," with the careful pronunciation of someone reading from a script that had been written by someone else. I said no. Frank said no. Maria said no. David said no. The soldier marked her clipboard and waved us through. On the other side of the checkpoint, a tent city was forming an arrest area. Families in vehicles, families in actual tents. A Red Cross station dispensing water and information packets. We didn't stop. Miguel's plan was Lamoni, another 30 miles north, where a more permanent processing center had been established. We reached Lamoni at 2 in the afternoon. The processing center was in a community college gymnasium. Hundreds of people, lines, wristbands. A triage station where medical workers checked temperatures and pupils and asked questions from another script. A children's area with donated toys where a woman in a volunteer vest took Lily's hand and said, "We have crayons inside. Do you want to color?" Lily looked at me. I nodded. She went. I watched her disappear into a cluster of other children who had arrived the same way she had, carried north by parents making impossible decisions on insufficient information. And I felt the specific relief of transferring even one fraction of responsibility to someone else's hands. The intake process took 3 hours. We were photographed. We were given wristbands. Green for cleared, yellow for pending, red for contact. Mine was green. Frank's was green. All of ours were green. We were assigned cots in a section of the gymnasium designated for family units. The cot was thin, and the pillow was flat, and it was the most welcome bed I have ever encountered. That night, on the gymnasium floor with Lily asleep on my chest and the sound of 200 people breathing in a shared space, I made a decision. I would not look for Sarah. I would not go south. I would not try to cross back into Missouri. She had used her last autonomous act to tell me to run, and I would honor that by continuing to run until there was nowhere left to run to. And then I would stop and build something in that place for our daughter. This was not acceptance. Acceptance implies a process that resolves. This was obedience. Obedience to the last clear instruction from the woman I married. She said, "Run." I ran. She said, "Take Lily north." I took Lily north. The marriage was still operative. I was still following her lead. The fact that she could no longer give new instructions didn't void the last ones. I lay in the dark with my daughter's heartbeat against my ribs, and I let that logic hold me. It was imperfect. It was probably delusional. But it gave me a structure to stand inside, and I needed a structure more than I needed truth. 3 weeks later, we were in a rented house in Osceola. The federal government had designated 12 counties in southern Iowa as a resettlement zone, and rent assistance was moving fast because the alternative was tent cities expanding until they became permanent. The house was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a window that faced south. I stood at that window more than was healthy. Looking south meant looking toward Missouri. Looking toward Missouri meant looking toward her. Lily started at a new school, an emergency consolidated school operating from a church basement with 32 children from 7 different cities, none of whom had arrived with both parents. Her teacher was a woman named Mrs. Abadi, who had come from Lee's Summit and who had the particular steadiness of someone who had chosen work as their survival mechanism. I recognized it because I was doing the same thing. I took a job at the processing center, administrative, sorting intake forms, matching separated families from databases that updated hourly. The work was useful. The work kept my hands and eyes occupied. The work occasionally produced miracles, a name matched, a family connected, someone found alive and retrievable. I searched the database for Sarah once, only once. Her name appeared in a sighting report from 3 weeks prior. Adult female, mid-30s, teal scrubs, Route 71 southbound cluster, mile marker 42. Reported by a trucker who had driven past and recognized the scrubs from his dentist's office. It wasn't confirmed. It wasn't her name. It was a guess based on clothing. But mile marker 42 on Route 71 was 6 miles from her practice, and teal scrubs with a floral print. And I closed the database and walked outside and sat on the curb and breathed until the shaking stopped. Frank and Maria settled 2 streets away. Miguel and Teresa took a house on the same block. We became a unit, not family by blood, but family by shared transit, by the memory of a drive north that had bonded us the way shared danger bonds anyone. Frank watched Lily on the afternoons I worked late. Maria taught her to make tortillas. David got a job with the Guard, helping clear roads and redirect clusters away from populated areas using sound equipment. They discovered that certain frequencies could redirect the figures without contact. He didn't talk about it much. None of us talked about the South much. It was there. We all faced it in our private moments. But together, we faced north. Together we built. Lily drew a picture in school of our family. It showed me, her, Dr. Carrots, Frank, Maria, Ace, and Celia. At the top of the page, above the sky, she'd drawn a figure in green with a small smile. No ground beneath the figure, just floating above everyone else. When Mrs. Abadi asked who it was, Lily said, "That's my mom. She's watching." I put the picture on the refrigerator and I looked at it every morning. And it was the truest thing anyone had said about our situation. 6 months later, the southern border had stabilized. Not resolved, stabilized. The clusters had stopped expanding northward at a line roughly corresponding to the Missouri-Iowa border, as if whatever drove them had reached a boundary it recognized or that satisfied its purpose. Scientists had theories. The public had opinions. The government had classifications and protocols and a new vocabulary that had replaced the emergency language of those first weeks with something more bureaucratic and therefore more permanent. The affected individuals, that was the official term now, stood in their millions across 7 states. They did not die. They did not eat. They did not deteriorate. Satellite imagery showed them standing in patterns that shifted slowly over weeks, rearranging into configurations that analysts debated without consensus. Some people called it the standing. Some called it the silence. The government called it the passive biological reorganization event, which meant nothing and was designed to mean nothing. Researchers in hazmat suits had approached clusters and conducted examinations. Brain activity was present, elevated, actually. Heart rates were normal. Core temperatures stable. They were alive. They were more than alive by some measures. They were simply not available. Not responsive to stimulus, not capable of independent movement, not producing language. Except occasionally, one would speak. A single word or phrase, directed at no one visible, in a voice that matched their living voice exactly. Stay. Come. Almost. These were cataloged without explanation. I received a letter from the Department of Reunification, a new agency formed from the merger of FEMA and HHS, informing me that Sarah Ann Prescott, age 36, had been formally identified within Cluster 7, Route 71, Missouri, via dental records obtained from a mobile identification unit. The letter expressed condolences as though she had died. It invited me to apply for survivor benefits. It included a pamphlet titled "Living with Ambiguous Loss" that I read once and then burned in the backyard with a calm that surprised me. She was not dead. She was standing in a field in Missouri with her brain alight and her mouth occasionally forming a word and her phone in her pocket with our last conversation preserved in it. She was not dead, and she was not alive. And the language did not exist for what she was, and the pamphlet could not hold her. I filed for the benefits because Lily needed stability, and stability required money, and money required me to check boxes on forms that categorized my wife as a casualty. I checked the boxes. I accepted the designation. I let the system do what systems do, flatten reality into processable units. But I did not believe it. I do not believe it now. She told me she could still think. She said the thinking part is still here. And until someone proves to me that the thinking stopped, I will not grieve her as gone. I will grieve her as unreachable, which is a different thing, and which requires a different kind of endurance. Lily is 7 now. She has lost 2 teeth and gained an understanding of the world that no 7-year-old should possess, but that she carries with the same practical grace she brought to every coloring book and imaginary moon voyage. She knows her mother is standing in Missouri. She knows this because I told her the truth when the truth became unavoidable. And she nodded, and she said, "Maybe someday they'll wake up." I said maybe. I meant it. I mean it still. I drive south once a month to the border observation point, a platform the Guard built on the Iowa side where families can look through mounted binoculars toward the clusters. I never see her. The clusters are too far, the figures too distant. But I go. I stand there and face south the way she faces north, or whatever direction she faces now. And I hold the phone in my pocket with her last messages preserved, and I wait. Not for rescue, not for cure, for the next sentence, the one she was typing when her fingers stopped. I believe it's still in her. I believe it will come. I believe the thinking part is composing it slowly, word by word, in the dark behind her open eyes. And when it arrives, when my phone lights up with the rest of her thought, I will be here, facing her, waiting, the way she would wait for me.